Barry, are we now seeing the long-term effects of lockdown?
I think we are, because what's happened in lockdown is a lot of conditions were not getting diagnosed early enough, they weren't getting treated early enough, and of course, as that happens, people are then finding out that they've got these conditions later on. The treatment is that much more expensive, it's that much more complicated. But let's be honest about this, Arlene. Yes, we now have waiting lists of 6.6, 6.7 million people on the waiting list. But even before lockdown, they were at record levels of 3.5 to 4 million on those waiting lists. And the Public Accounts Committee recently came out with a report that said that they have not met the cancer targets since 2014. We're talking 8 years back. So this is the long-term underfunding of our National Health Service during the austerity years. It was a deliberate policy. It didn't not only keep it pace with inflation, but as you know, medical inflation is much higher than normal inflation, so it certainly didn't keep pace with that, the funding that was going in.
Although if you take, and I mean, I know I use Northern Ireland as a yardstick because I know it better than elsewhere in the UK, but I mean, we're spending over 50% of our block grant now on the health service. I mean, that is incredible. There must be more to it that we need to do rather than just throw money at it, Barry. That's the point I'm making to you. There are other issues that need to be addressed as well as putting more money.
Arlene, we go back to the supply side. And, I know later on we'll be talking about A-level results and so on. But why is it? Why is it that we don't have enough doctors when kids with 4 A-star A-levels are being told, no, we haven't got a place for you in medical school? This is insane. We need to be making sure that we've got enough nurses, enough doctors going into the system, so we're not actually having to poach them from developing countries at their expense. And the whole push that happened about a decade ago when George Osborne came in and said, we don't need this headroom in the NHS. We can reduce the number of beds so that we get it much closer to the actual occupancy rates. So all the slack that was there in the system, which could cope with that increase, was taken away. And this is about the supply side. It is about skills and jobs.
And it's the issue you talked about, skills and jobs. Paul, what's your take on the lockdown excess deaths?
Well, I think the bill's landing to a certain degree, Arlene. I was one of those people who expressed severe reservations over the extremities of the restrictions that were imposed. The biggest restrictions on our personal liberties outside of wartime. And whilst obviously you want a compassionate society that looks after people who are at risk, I questioned at the time, and I think a number of people did, and we were shot down in flames, actually, whether it was necessary to effectively quarantine the entire population, including the healthy part, millions of healthy people, for a virus that ultimately posed a serious threat to a small minority of people. That's not to say for a moment that you don't throw everything at trying to protect those people and putting in place everything that you can to make sure they are protected. But I think, those of us who said at the time, look, we're going to crash our economy, and that will have significant effects on the well-being of this country years into the future. And I think we're seeing part of that now. And B, in terms of people's health, the undetected cancers, the heart disease, the mental health issues and stuff, this stuff will come down the track in a few years' time. Paul, and I think that's being improved.
You wouldn't have wanted people with those conditions, who wanted to get tested for cancer or get diagnosed for other things. You wouldn't have wanted them going into hospital and potentially contracting COVID. So I think we have to separate out the very sensible measures that were taken to say to people, stay away, because we're absolutely at busting point trying to deal with COVID, and we don't want you to come into that environment. And we know that some people, unfortunately, who were already in hospital then contracted COVID from the people with COVID who were coming in.
But cancer is more of a threat to people, Barry, than COVID is.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is...
this was obvious. The undetected cancers were always going to...
We have to divorce the lockdown which was about restrictions on where we could go and who we could associate with outside of a hospital setting from what was going on in a hospital setting in a medical context. And, you know, we can discuss whether or not the lockdown was too severe in terms of constraints on, you know, people's liberty. But I think actually what we're seeing here is simply the result of people not going to doctors, not wanting to clog up the system when it was at breaking point. Because had that happened, everything could have...
But there must have been a better way of doing that. I mean, you can't say to people who suspect they may be very unwell, whether with heart disease or with cancer, no, don't come into hospital for treatment or don't come in to get diagnosed.
And
I just think that is so cruel. That's so cruel.
People were frightened, effectively bullied into not going. People were effectively told, look, unless you are at death's door, do not come near this hospital because we're too busy.
And we could have set up the Nightingale as a designated. And what happened? We set it up and then it didn't do anything. And it was all deconstructed again. So there were ways, I agree with you. I don't think the government...
I think we have to take learning points from what happened, and I think that's what we need to do.